They hold the world in their hands, an elite class of individuals with more wealth than entire countries and all the power that comes with it. Billionaires.
Inequality is rising to the highest levels ever seen in human history, where the concentration of wealth in few hands is off the charts.
Literally, a new billionaire was created about every 26 hours. That is not normal. That's actually quite frightening, and it's frightening on many levels.
In this video, we look at what it takes to become a billionaire.
They are extremely proficient in, so to say, communicating their vision, their goals, and making other people join them somehow in their mission.
We'll ask a billionaire what it's like to be among the world's most wealthy.
Growing up, you're fascinated by a bunch of things that you think you really want. And when time comes and you can afford those things, they lose value very quickly.
We'll also explore some of the dangers that wealth and power can bring.
Some people at that time started to joke that whenever you end up on such a list of the wealthiest entrepreneurs in China, you are somehow an endangered species.
And we'll hear about attempts to fight back against the enormous inequality that billionaires represent.
Those people are going to fight for their own interests, and there's nothing weird actually about it. There's nothing surprising about it. And we should just fight for ours as people.
That's all coming up on Business Beyond. In our quest to understand the world's wealthy, there's only one place to start, in the United States. The US is home to the superstar billionaire, the self-made man, and it's almost always a man, who built themselves up to become rich and famous, the embodiment of the American dream. The US has produced almost all of the top 10 richest in the world, with the likes of Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates achieving riches that no human being has ever achieved before, mostly through owning astonishingly profitable companies.
In the United States today, two people have as much wealth as the entire bottom 50% of the US population. That's Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, just two individuals, as much wealth as the bottom half.
But how did they reach this point? Do billionaires set out with the goal of becoming billionaires?
You will never become a billionaire with the motivation of just making money. It's about, winning the game of business. It's about also building something, creating something unique. It's also about social impact, right? Because they don't want to be the flag in the wind. They want to be the wind, right? They want to have impact on their environment, on the world around them.
The world's richest have mostly exerted their influence through technology, be that home computing, online shopping, or electric cars.
This is something also that Elon Musk or even Steve Jobs were talking about pretty often. Instead of waiting for the future or trying to predict the future, you can actually create it, right?
Their positions at the forefront of tech mean America's billionaires certainly have their fans. They're also responsible for employing hundreds of thousands, and in Amazon's case, over 1 million people. But there's also a movement within the United States to curb what is seen by some as the excessive wealth and the excessive power of a tiny elite.
When you look at the Jeff Bezoses or Elon Musks or Bill Gates or others, they live in this world in which they can increase their wealth in business and then use some of the spoils of wealth to buy political influence, which they do.
Billionaire wealth, it doesn't just buy you a fancy yacht or a trip to space. It also buys you a pliant media. It buys you policies and politicians in your favor. It buys you impunity from justice.
We've seen the enormous influence brought by wealth play out in front of our eyes. Perhaps the best known example in the US is the Koch brothers, whose family founded America's second biggest private company, Koch Industries. They used their billions to directly fund political causes, such as bankrolling Republican candidates who support minimal government interference in their business activities. But others have found more creative ways to avoid excessive scrutiny from the state.
When Mark Zuckerberg spends $300 million, as he did in 2020, on securing the American election, an election he profited from making less secure by allowing disinformation to run rampant, hate speech to run rampant, Nazi speech to run rampant on his platform. When Mark Zuckerberg then turns around and does that and gets a lot of headlines for his small gift to secure the election that he has made unsafe, what he does is he kind of douses the flames of anger just enough that he can keep doing it.
The very famous US Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis said many, many decades ago, he said that we can either have an extreme concentration of wealth or we can have democracy, but we can't have both. And I think that rings so profoundly true today.
Later on, we'll look a little deeper at whether or not the wealth and power of billionaires should be reined in. But first, we need to better understand who it is we're dealing with. To do that, we need to head to another hotbed of billionaires, the world's industrial powerhouse, China. According to the Hurun Global Rich List, it is China that has the most billionaires of any country in the world, including the US. But the story of China's super rich goes back only a few decades.
Well, the whole thing started in the 80s when the Chinese government decided to first informally and then eventually also formally allow private business again. I mean, prior to the reforms, we didn't have private enterprises.
Communist China's conversion to a socialist market economy meant new opportunities for individuals to make vast amounts of money.
Starting from the 90s, a lot of people also took the opportunity for a number of reasons. One was that they realized that those who had dared to do so already in the 80s started to become rather rich. I mean, comparatively at that time's level, we were far from billionaires at the time, but we had the first millionaires, and that was quite impressive for a lot of people. We then saw a new development in the 2000s and 2010, so to speak, but especially in the 2000s, where people became somewhat super rich already for Chinese standards. That was on the one hand in things related to film and media and so on. I mean, with the first celebrities that became really prominent. And on the other hand, especially also in technology.
And it's China's booming tech sector that has produced some of the most famous names in Chinese business. Names like Jack Ma, charismatic co-founder of online retail leviathan Alibaba. But just as he was once seen as a symbol of China's entrepreneurial prowess, Ma has now become a symbol of what some see as China's attempts to tame the ultra-rich. Jack Ma all but disappeared from public view in late 2020 after giving a speech in which he criticised China's financial regulators. It followed Beijing's intervention to block the IPO of his digital finance firm Ant Group.
The discussion is still open whether he knew that the winds were changing and that was kind of the last effort to speak out openly against this change, or whether the speech itself kind of triggered the change. I tend to the former, but at least after that, we saw much more regulation for the fintech sector, for technology, at least internet technology companies. And also then last summer, a lot of regulation coming out for other areas where some people had made a lot of money.
As a result of the tighter regulation, tycoons in China's technology, education and real estate sectors have found themselves slipping down the rich list. Some onlookers are convinced that these individuals had accrued too much power along with their money for Beijing's liking. Nowhere do billionaires have their hands more firmly on the levers of power than in Russia, home of the world's most notorious oligarchy. When President Vladimir Putin ordered Russian troops into Ukraine, one of the first ways in which Western allies responded was to impose sanctions on Russia's super rich. That tells you a great deal about how important they are to propping up Putin's government. Another clue is in the word we use to describe Russia's billionaires: oligarch.
It's a word that is actually very ancient. It goes back thousands of years. And oligarchs or oligarchy refers to a very special situation in which extremely wealthy people have tremendous political power.
Russia's super rich largely made their money by seizing upon opportunities brought by the fall of the Soviet Union.
In the first years, starting with the late 80s, going into the 90s, pretty much the only way one could become extremely wealthy very quickly was you somehow were smart enough to be able to grab assets and to privatize them to yourself.
The unceremonious fall of communism in Russia created huge opportunities for individuals to acquire lucrative property and resources from the state at knockdown prices. And purchases made back then shaped the billionaire landscape in Russia today.
If we're talking about the very, very top, how one can make a fortune in the billions or tens of billions, it depends on what it is that your country has riches in. So, for example, in the case of Russia, pretty much most of the action is in things like oil, gas, things like that. So that's why we saw so many of the oligarchs around metals and natural resources.
But being a Russian billionaire can be a risky business. Acquiring and then holding on to your wealth often means playing a dangerous game.
The more to the east you go, the more entrepreneurs are considered more maybe like gangsters or something, right? And it is really difficult. For me, it was also difficult in countries like Russia or China to find entrepreneurs who have white vests, who can be role models, who didn't have any, let's say, any contacts to Kremlin and so on and so on.
Pretty much the only two, and we're talking major countries here, the only two countries in the world where one is really in danger as an oligarch of being jailed are Russia and China. And you could be killed in either of those places as well, by execution or by, I guess, plutonium and other kinds of dangerous substances that might be used in the case of Russia.
So being a billionaire in Russia can often mean watching your back. But what is it like to live the billionaire lifestyle elsewhere? For that, let's head to India. In the year 2000, India had only a handful of billionaires, but now some estimates put the number at over 200. One of them is Nikhil Kamath. More than a decade ago, he and his brother set up the online trading platform Zerodha. A boom in individual Indians taking to the stock market in the past couple of years propelled the pair of them up the rich list and into the $1 billion club. I asked Nikhil what motivated him at the start of his entrepreneurial journey.
Turning a profit, I think, was the primary goal, right? You can do many things, but you need to be profitable before you can think about being responsible with money and all of that. So at the very beginning, the journey started with the intention of making money, turning a profit.
A modest aim to start off with, but Nikhil admits he still had his sights set on joining the ranks of India's ultra-wealthy.
Growing up in a middle-class household in India, you always, we celebrate our entrepreneurs, and societies across the world celebrate the more affluent, be it through social media, be it through television or movies, and the same happens here. So growing up, definitely your subconscious is programmed to want to have what you do not have.
But now he does have it. So what is it actually like, having all that money?
The strange thing about money is when money gives you more when you do not spend it, but knowing that you have the ability to buy something. When you end up buying this thing you have aspired for, it becomes less valuable in a way. So I would say money is most, to me, is freedom. It's that ability to be able to do all these things, even though I don't actually do these things.
India is a country that's become characterized by the growing gap between its richest and poorest people. But more broadly, the distribution of wealth the world over is seen by some as nothing short of obscene. According to Oxfam, the 10 richest people in the world have doubled their combined wealth since the start of the coronavirus pandemic, helped by soaring stock markets and our increased reliance on technology. Oxfam also points out that those same 10 people now have a combined wealth greater than that of the least wealthy 3.1 billion people on the planet.
Do we want to live in a world in which we have such extremes of wealth at the top? At the same time, that world is one in which inequality literally kills. Yes, inequality leads to unhappy, unhealthy, unfair societies, but we've been able to show how inequality itself kills. Like, inequality contributes to 1 death every 4 seconds. Is that really a world we want to live in?
That every billionaire is a policy failure. And it's important to say that that is not to say every billionaire is a bad person or a mean person we don't like or should go, lock away in a cabinet. It's just a policy failure, right? And by the way, every hungry person is also a policy failure. And those policy failures are related. They're failures of priority.
So if the existence of billionaires is somehow a failure on the part of humanity, how do we go about making amends for that? Well, one way would be to take some of their wealth from them and to redistribute it. Basically, tax them. But opponents of those who want billionaires to be hit with extra taxes argue that we would put at risk the businesses and millions of jobs that they're responsible for.
Now imagine you own 60% of that company. You are in charge. You can decide about everything. Now you get a tax, and in order to service that tax, you would need to sell, let's say, 10 or 11% of that company, right? So you sell that the shares, then you lose maybe the control of the company. The company, the new management doesn't perform that well. People lose jobs. The economy loses products or services. Does it solve any of the problems? I don't think so.
An alternative to taxing billionaires is to encourage them to share their wealth themselves. It's a policy China is already deploying.
While they have to give back, so they are doing good for the society on the one hand. On the other hand, for those companies, being somehow encouraged or forced to do charity is in the short run maybe hurtful. But in the longer run, they, I think, prefer this to tax payments, because taxes, once you have a new tax for the super rich, it's very difficult to take that back.
Alternatively, you can just hope the billionaires will perform their own acts of philanthropy. And that's something we do already see. Bill Gates and his then-wife Melinda pledged $15 billion to charity through their own foundation during 2021, making them the world's biggest charitable donors. But even then, activists seeking greater wealth distribution are skeptical of the motivations of billionaires.
I don't think Bill Gates is in some narrow, cunning sense trying to score a few reputational points. I think he's genuinely trying to make the world a better place in his mind. The problem is, with almost no exceptions, the people in that class, when they set out to do this kind of do-gooding, even when they're earnest about it and want to do it, they tend to do it in ways that rule out any threats to their own power. Right? So you don't see Bill Gates saying, let's fix the American education system by taxing very rich people a lot more.
Earlier on, we heard the existence of billionaires described as a policy failure. It begs a big question. Would the world be a better place without them?
I think we have to be really upfront and really be quite clear to say that a world of such extreme billionaire wealth is a fundamental problem. It's an impediment to human progress.
The billionaire class in the world is one of the great threats to democracy and human flourishing everywhere.
Or have billionaires simply earned their place at the top of society and should be celebrated accordingly?
Making someone who is a byproduct of capitalism and has done well through that look like the enemy, I don't think that's right, because you need these people for the society to kind of grow and for economies to do better.
Billionaires are world champions in the industries. They just outcompeted everybody else in the field. And they look at it as a game of business. And this is another motivation. They just enjoy playing this game of business.
That's all for this episode of Business Beyond. For more from us, check out our playlist. Thanks a lot for watching, and until the next time, take care.